Welcome back to another edition. I'm titling this podcast, When the Fundamentals Feel Shaky, Financial Planning in a Time That Feels Unprecedented. Every time the market drops, there's a familiar rhythm. You receive, as a planner, some anxious calls. You do a portfolio review. And almost every time, a client will say, this time it's different. And for decades, financial planners have leaned into the same reply. It always feels that way, but the fundamentals are still sound. It always feels different, but it never is. And to be quite honest with you, lately I've been wondering if this time it may be different. What if this time some of those fundamentals, the ones that we've counted on like gravity, aren't as firm as they used to be? What if we're standing on ground that's quietly, or not so quietly, shifting beneath our feet? I want to be clear that this episode isn't about panic. It's not about doom. It is about being present. It is about reality. And it's asking, what does it mean to lead? What does it mean to plan and to stay grounded when the old compass stops pointing north? There's some of you that probably will have parts that are pretty upset with me with this podcast, because I find myself these days talking what has now become redefined as political, because money and finance and some of the normal tenets, principles of economics are being politicized. So for that, I ask you to take this in the spirit that I'm offering it, as someone who understands something about economics, that understands something about personal finance, that understands something about financial policy, and that understands a little bit about how our emotions play into all this. So financial planners have had a pretty trusted playbook. They've built their planning practices on a solid foundation. And I'll call those the big assumptions. Markets fall, markets rise, America recovers. The dollar is stable, it's respected, trade is global, the rule of law holds. Our institutions, however messy, eventually self-correct. And this playbook has carried generations through war, recessions, inflations, even pandemics. But what happens when those assumptions start to wobble? What happens when democracy feels really fragile? When allies pull away from us? When our trust in the courts and media and financial leadership erodes? I'd suggest to you these aren't just concerns. They're cracks. And for financial professionals, whether it be financial planners, investment advisors, financial therapists, ignoring them doesn't really serve anyone. Let's take a cue from history. We have spent a lot of time in history. Again, like I've said, the historical playbook comes from history. And I think in these times it's good to take a look at history and go back almost 100 years to 1930. There was something called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, and it raised U.S. tariffs to nearly 60%. They went up, I think maybe they started at 40% in 1929 and raised up to 62% in 1932. And they were well-intentioned. They were meant to protect American industry during a global turndown. But instead, they backfired. They triggered retaliatory tariffs and cratered global trade by 2/3, by 66%. And they helped turn a recession into the Great Depression. A guy by the name of Ray Dalio, who's head of Bridgewater, the largest hedge fund in the world, and known to be a really moderate guy, and quite frankly, he's developed a DDO, deliberately developmental organization. He's employed a lot of transparency and actually a lot of therapeutic modalities into his company. And he's always been balanced and a moderate. And he's recently come out very concerned that we're going to do the same thing and trigger a depression. We're imposing 145% tariffs on Chinese imports, 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And even Canadian minerals and energy products are facing 10% tariffs. These aren't obscure countries. Every other country right now is at 10%, with the more draconian tariffs being lifted for a temporary period of time. But these, where the heaviest tariffs remain, are our top 3 trading partners. And we're choosing isolation at a time when the global economy is already fragile. Trade, trust, and interdependence, they aren't weaknesses. They're stabilizers. And like in the 1930s, we're removing them. Another concern is the declining dollar. In the past 3 months, the dollar has dropped nearly 10%, hitting a 10-year low. This is stunning. The dollar has been the world's reserve currency for generations, not because it's perfect, but because it's reliable. Former Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen recently warned that our policies are eroding global trust in the U.S. economic leadership. So, central banks around the world are actively exploring alternatives to the dollar. Some say that the dollar's dominance is over. Again, a lot of these people are not alarmists. They don't go around the world screaming wolf. They don't have a history of that. I had a person I really respect who is very much on the inside in Washington, D.C. tell me, Rick, it's not if we're doing harm on a global basis. We have done it. The harm has been done, and it will take us a generation to repair it. This isn't about foreign exchange. It's about confidence. And it's confidence in a bedrock of markets. And when it slips, things really begin to wobble. And all of this, you might say, Rick, I thought this was a financial therapy podcast. What are you doing talking about hardcore economics and politics? Because we've got to pay attention. Because all of this is affecting and will continue to affect our personal finances and our personal emotional well-being. So this is about awareness, and I know that this may be really difficult for many of you to tune into, and some of you may have already left the podcast by now. But it's really important for us to understand that for most of our lifetimes, the U.S. has operated at the center of a global web of alliances. This is all we've known. This is all I've known in my 70 years on the planet. We've had economic, diplomatic, cultural alliances. We didn't just trade, we actually set the rules. We didn't just cooperate. We led coalitions. But now those ties are fraying, quietly in some cases, in ways that until recently I didn't even realize, and publicly in others. Let me give you some reports. This is from The Economist and Reuters. Okay, these are two really middle of the road factual publications that suggest the U.S. alliances may be damaged beyond repair. Our traditional partners like Canada, Germany, Japan are hedging. Others are beginning to form multilateral agreements without the U.S. at the table for the first time. This isn't academic. These shifts are affecting current policy, global trade flows, military postures, and most of all, as they concern financial therapy, they're affecting investor psychology and our markets. And because when the world sees a leader pulling back, or worse, lurching unpredictably, capital doesn't wait to debate. Capital doesn't go, I wonder what's going to happen. It moves. Something also that I think is pretty subtle, but it's very telling, is tourism. International tourism in the U.S. is down 25% already in 3 months. Why? Because people are afraid to come here. And I've spent, the last 3 months, I've spent, I guess, about 3 or 5 weeks out of the U.S. And I want to tell you, it's real. It's not about shootings or airport delays or even our politics. It's a real fear that the perception that something in the American fabric is unraveling. And definitely when we are deporting people without the due process of law, this is terrifying. And there hasn't just been one. There's been a number of people apprehended, kept in jail, even Europeans. That is scaring people, that America is no longer safe if you are a foreigner. The Financial Times, again, Financial Times of London, another really boring, middle of the road, factual paper, recently published an editorial stating that the U.S. is halfway to making America a political state, or a police state. The U.S. is halfway to making America a police state. Now, obviously, I'm not making this stuff up. And I've seen this, these are all headlines from the past week. I think this deserves our attention as financial therapists, financial planners, investment advisors, as academicians, as anybody involved with financial therapy. And for those of you listening who are consumers, all of this that I've just told you, it doesn't come from a political firebrand. It comes from some of the most respected economic newspapers in the world. And this is about reputation. And in markets, reputation is everything. In the small town I live in, your reputation is everything. And when the perception of stability erodes, so does investment, migration, and innovation. So, I am starting to hear things from clients saying, maybe I should sell everything. Maybe I should get out. Maybe I should look at a global visa in Portugal or Greece, or it was Spain. They have just stopped their global visa. And a global visa is you can, for a certain amount of money that you agree to move offshore and invest into that country, they will relax the residency requirements and give you a residency visa and a path to citizenship. Now, what are people really asking me when they're wanting to know if they should sell out, if they should turn everything to cash, if they should get out? And there's more people getting out right now at the U.S. than at any time in history, according to what I'm reading. I think emigration is up 1,534%. What these aren't so much financial questions. People are saying, I'm scared. I don't trust our institutions anymore. This doesn't feel like the country I grew up in. And of course, if we put this into IFS, we have parts that are quite alarmed. We have parts that are feeling panic, and they're saying we're at the edge of a collapse. Get out now. Some parts of people, clients that have been through, some of my international clients that are living here are going back to legacy, generational fears that this is how it started for my grandparents in Europe. Other parts just want to become avoidant. I want to stop checking the news. I want to stop listening to the news. And I have to agree that turning off the news can bring, some solace and peace, some calm. And I think that's important. But I struggle with avoidance of not acknowledging what is happening. So none of these parts are irrational, of course not. They all have a good part, an intentionality and parts to play in our system. And there's quite a polarization. There's a polarization within me. Even doing this podcast, like, Rick, you're being overly dramatic. This is a place to feel better and to look deeper. And you need to just be quiet. You're going to upset a lot of your clients with this type of talk. So believe me, I've got the voices going on. And then I wonder, what is my position? What's my position as a financial planner? What's my role as a financial therapist when a client is addressing these concerns, these fears? So asset allocation matters in financial planning, and matters with our personal finances. Right now, we probably need emotional regulation, both from ourselves and our parts, and from our professionals. And we get emotional regulation by really being with our parts, listening, and really getting them, not shaming them, not saying, I shouldn't be emotional, I shouldn't feel this way. But by really honoring their concerns and their fears. So I say that to say that your financial professionals, if you're a consumer, they're reading the same headlines or watching the same court decisions or watching the same defiance of court orders. And if they're being honest, I think most are feeling some unease. Not all. Some are feeling very confident in what is happening, and that this is all very good and very needed. And I can only hope they're right. But from the historical lens that I'm looking through, there's a lot of concern. So self-leadership right now is more important than ever within all of us personally. Like I said, it doesn't mean silencing all of our parts or making any of them wrong. It means being in relationship with all of them and then choosing to lead. So again, if people are telling you, like I'm hearing, you're just being overly dramatic, you sound like a conspiracy theorist, this is just politics, I don't know. I think it's about patterns. And what really concerns me, and I had this again verified recently by somebody a lot more connected than I am politically, is that in the 1930s, in Germany, artists, journalists, political critics warned that the rule of law was breaking down, and that the media was being captured, and that universities were being cleansed of dissent. And most people then said, that's too extreme, it'll blow over, this is going to pass. People named it. There was one German artist that painted what he saw: corruption, rising fascism, blind nationalism. And he was thought to be way too radical, way too offensive, and he fled Germany in 1933. And by the time the public realized what was happening, it was too late. Is there any parallel here? Should we be concerned? We're hearing similar warnings from voices that are not known for alarmism. Thomas Friedman in the New York Times wrote, I've never been more afraid for my country's future. David Brooks, a brilliant guy. I've quoted him here before. He nailed the pandemic, what was going to happen in the pandemic. And I have a podcast on that. He's a centrist columnist, probably a little bit more right-leaning. He wrote, what's happening is not normal. America needs an uprising. That is not normal. And even from the halls of the Senate, Senator Lisa Murkowski said plainly when asked, "We're afraid," from somebody in a town hall. She responded, "We're all afraid." Again, these aren't radical voices. They're respected moderates, and they're sounding the alarm. Their words give us permission to listen more carefully, not to just the world around us, but to what our own intuition and the own parts of ourselves are trying to tell us. And sometimes being early means you're paying attention. And sometimes speaking the truth before others are ready to hear it is the most responsible act of leadership that can be offered. So here's the most important truth I can offer you in these uncertain times. You're not powerless. Yeah, the world feels unstable. The headlines are heavy. This podcast was heavy. And yes, some of the assumptions that underpin decades of planning are shifting, but you still have agency. And in fact, the right actions taken calmly, consciously, consistently can anchor you even when the broader environment feels unmoored. So let's take a look at what you can do. Before you do anything with your money, check in with your system, your internal system. Because most financial mistakes aren't strategic errors. They're emotional reactions. So you just need to name what you're feeling. Say it out loud. Admit it. I'm scared. I'm angry. I feel powerless. That naming creates distance and opens a window for clarity. In IFS terms, it takes, and then blending happens to where more self-energy can step forward. When fear rises, return to your body. It could be a morning walk. It could be a breathing practice. It could be a candlelight meditation, or a nurturing bath, whatever. You need to tell yourself we're okay right now, bringing ourselves back to the here and now in this present moment. Monitor your media intake, balance your sources, set boundaries with your phones. Try and not avoid, but try not to be in like a fire hose, just overcome by information. Talk about it with the right people. Focus on what you can control. Don't try to time the market. Reassess your liquidity. Don't panic right now. Don't sell out of markets. But be sure you're diversified. Be sure you've got a lot of investments if you have investments outside of the U.S. And this isn't anything new. This is just normal diversified investing. But as much as possible, try to make self-led decisions around your finances. Maybe this time it's different. Maybe it's not. Maybe we're living through a slow motion redefinition of what's normal or of what safe means. But what hasn't changed is we still need to lead. We need to be voices of reason. We need to listen. We need to be steadfast. It's really important that all of us step up during this time. If you're scared, you're not weak. You're paying attention. If you're angry, you're not broken. You care. And if you're unsure how to lead right now, well, welcome. This means you're human. Thanks for listening.